Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Rice. And I'm so grateful to have you as a colleague, a friend, and as a leader in our administration and efforts to address mental health in America. I'm really glad that we're having this conversation today. There is so much to say about mental health, but there's so much that goes unsaid as well. When I speak to families across the country, when I travel and have the privilege of being in living rooms and town halls and schools and workplaces across America, so many times people have stories to tell about their own struggles with mental health, about their children and their struggles with mental health. We're all touched in some way by this profound epidemic around mental health that has swept across our country and really across the world. And the pandemic really pulled back the curtain on that. It helped so many of us see that we and people around us were in fact struggling deeply. And as we, come through this pandemic, it's important for us to recognize that those invisible scars are still there for many people in terms of the stress, the anxiety, the depression, and the loneliness that many have experienced during the pandemic. But we know that the mental health crisis that we're facing preceded the pandemic. And some of the numbers that Ambassador Rice mentioned are really poignant and powerful, and they put into perspective just how deep this challenge is. To put it another way, think about a high school for a moment that had 1,000 students in it. 450 of those students today in America are feeling profound senses of hopelessness and helplessness. About 200 of those students are considering taking their own life. And about 100 of those students have actually attempted suicide. That is the state of youth mental health in America right now. This is why it is so urgent for us to do something about this issue now, to recommit to addressing this crisis. And it's why I feel incredibly grateful that at this moment in time, that President Biden, that members of this administration and members of Congress are working hard to address that crisis. The efforts that Ambassador Rice put forward around the efforts we've already undertaken to expand access to care, to get more counselors in school, to talk about this issue more and try to eradicate the stigma around mental health. These are important steps. And I will say that in all the years I've been in public health, I have never been as hopeful as I am now that we can take the steps we need to address this crisis. And finally, I want to end with that word hope, because that's what this conversation is about today. It's about restoring hope, but also humanity to the conversation on mental health. It's about pulling back that curtain on an issue that so many people are struggling with. So folks don't feel that they have to be ashamed if they're struggling. So they know it's okay to ask for help. All of us, whether we are parents or whether we have children in our lives that we care about, we want to make sure that our kids are well. And what we've learned is that our mental health is the fuel that allows us to show up in our lives for other people, to do the things that we do at work, in our neighborhoods, and at home. If we don't have our mental health, then we're not able to be our fullest and best versions of ourselves. And so that's why I'm so excited about today's conversation and thrilled to be doing it with the West Wing cast, who, by the way, in their own work on the West Wing, have inspired me over the years, who gave me hope at times when I was feeling down about the state of the world or politics in the past when I was younger. So I'm grateful for them to lending their voices to yet another cause that's so important, and that's the mental health of America. With that, I'm grateful to pass it on to another one of our incredible leaders here in the administration, our Secretary of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra, who is a good friend, a champion for people across this country who are struggling with their health. And I'm so grateful he's joining us today. Secretary Becerra?
Dr. Murthy, Ambassador Rice, and to the team at West Wing, great to be together to do this work. We have much to do. Thank God we have been led by two presidents, President Biden and President Bartlett, who are committed to this. We believe that we can resolve this. We want to tell the resilient professionals who have hung in there through thick and thin, including through COVID. Thank you very much for being there. We know we have a shortage of a workforce needed to address the mental health crisis, but we're going to do it. And we understand that COVID just exposed what's been out there for a while. We need to get out there and work with everyone. We're very thankful for those who are joining us today, and we're especially thankful to the Bartlett administration for joining forces with the Biden administration today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Secretary Becerra. And I want to invite a dear friend to join us next, and that is Melissa Fitzgerald. Melissa is a cast member from the West Wing, but she has been such a powerful advocate around issues related to mental health and substance use disorders over the years. She's the reason that I got connected to the West Wing staff in the first place years ago when I was Surgeon General in the Obama administration. So, Melissa, I would love to have you join and to introduce the rest of the West Wing cast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Morthy. It's such an honor to be here. And thank you, Ambassador Rice and Secretary Becerra, for convening this important conversation. I think we can all agree that there is no more pressing issue than the one that we are tackling today. And I'm very excited to introduce my friends and West Wing castmates. And I'm going to start with Dulé Hill, who is joining us from the set of The Wonder Years. Mary McCormick, who is there, who played Kate Harper. And of course, you know, Dulé Hill played Charlie Young, and Brad Whitford, who played Josh Lyman. And of course, the president himself, Mr. Martin Sheen. Now, when I asked each of you to join today's conversation, you all jumped at the chance. And what I want everyone to know out there is that they always jump at the chance. Not only are they incredible actors, but they're dedicated and committed to working on causes that improve people's lives like this one. And, you know, I'd like to throw this to Dulé. I'd like to ask everybody, but start with Dulé, because Dulé is filming and they're going to call him any second, to share why it's important to you to be part of this conversation today. Dulé?
Well, first of all, thank you all for having me. It really is an honor to be able to share this moment with you all. You know, I know from personal experience, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted our mental health. It has exacerbated feelings of isolation, anxiety, depression, a loss that many of us have experienced individually and collectively. And the fact of the matter is we're all struggling in some way. And there seems to be like this cloud that hovers above where we're supposed to suffer in silence or retreat to our individual corners and deal with it on our own. But I do believe there is power in conversation. There's power in communication. There is power in opening up and sharing what we're going through. So I really want to be a part of this talk today to talk about it. I feel like that is a major step in realizing that you are not alone. If I can see somebody else who I believe can relate to me, then that can give me hope and inspiration to press on forward to really not even till tomorrow, but to my next moment. So I thank you all for inviting me here for this conversation. I thank you all for having this conversation, and I really hope that it has an effect of letting people know that you are not alone. There is help, and treatment works.
Thank you, Dulé. And thank you for making a Herculean effort to be with us today from the set. And Martin, I'd like to turn to you and share, if you wouldn't mind sharing why it's important for you to be here today and be part of this conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa. I'm delighted to be here. I've been a longtime advocate for addiction and mental health issues, so I'm here today to support the Biden administration in making treatment a priority with understanding and compassion for addiction and mental health. And I'm confident that this new approach will bring renewed hope and optimism for both addiction and mental health care providers and those they serve in critical need.
Thank you, Martin. Mary, you're up.
Okay, I wrote this part down because I didn't want to mess it up. I am a mother of 3 children. I am concerned about youth mental health, not only for my own children, but for children across the country. One of the most tragic impacts of our mental health crisis has been the increase in suicide, especially among youth. Several populations are especially at high risk for suicide, including American Indians, Alaska Native youth, LGBTQ+ youth, rural communities, military veterans, law enforcement officials, and health professionals. I'm here today to learn more about school-based interventions that can reach our children before these crises occur. Conversations like the one we're having here today are so important for reducing stigma. And so I'm here to listen and to learn and to help spread the message, if I can, that help is out there.
Thank you, Mary. Brad.
Hey, I'm here because I absolutely want to learn more about the Biden administration's historic investments in addressing addiction and mental health, including the new, this is a fantastic idea, 988 National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. The more we talk about mental health, the more we reduce stigma and create pathways for people to get the help they need. I'm excited to have an open and honest conversation. I I like everybody watching and on this panel. I believe I've struggled with these issues in my life, and I've had a very lucky life, a very lucky childhood, a very lucky professional life, but I've gone through times of depression that was absolutely debilitating, and the only way out of it is to connect with other people and to get people the resources that they need. So I'm thrilled to be able to talk about these things with everybody here, and to get the word out that when you're struggling, reach out for help, because everybody's gone through this.
Yeah. Thank you, Brad. And I know you and I spoke the other day, and I shared with you the same thing, that I struggle as well. And so I have an interest personally, and also, I have a particular interest because of the work that I am so honored to do in the way that mental health and addiction intersect with the justice system. And through my work with treatment courts, I've seen lives transformed by equitable, evidence-based treatment instead of incarceration. And I am incredibly grateful for the investments this administration has made to support treatment courts and other critical programs, because no one is beyond hope. And every single day, I see people who many have given up on get better. And it fills me with hope. And I would like anyone who's joining us today who's hurting or who's struggling to know that there's hope. And I hope that today you reach out to some of the resources that we're going to talk about today that are available, and find the help you need, because you are worth it. Passing it back to you, Dr. Murthy.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa. And just how wonderful to hear from all of you just about your passion for being here and how deeply you care about this issue. I think that says a lot about you as individuals, but it is also what we need right now in the country. There are a lot of people who are struggling and who need to just hear this exact message of hope that you just shared, that there is help available. And we're going to talk even more about that in this conversation. But then also that you're not alone. So many times, I think when people struggle with depression or anxiety, part of what makes it feel worse is them thinking that everyone else looks fine and that they're the only ones who are struggling. But one of the things I hope people take away from this is that we all struggle from time to time. And that includes myself. I've struggled with feelings of anxiety over the years. As a child, I certainly, in retrospect, struggled with depression, even though I didn't know exactly what it was. But this is a moment where we hope that everyone who does struggle knows that there is help, that they can reach out for that help. I do want to talk go ahead. No worries. I did want to talk for a moment about community and connection. One of the things that we have learned so much over the course of not just a pandemic, but even the years preceding that, is that our mental health is very much tied to the relationships we have in our life. When we are blessed with healthy, fulfilling relationships, when we have people with whom we can be ourselves, when we feel supported by other people, that does a tremendous amount to boost our mental health. It gives us people we can reach out to during times of struggle. Conversely, when we struggle with loneliness and isolation, that increases the risk of anxiety and depression. That also, it turns out, increases the risk of physical illness. And COVID was a time, I think, when many people came to see even more clearly than ever how important their relationships were in their life. It's one of the things I actually deeply admire about the West Wing cast, is that even though it's been years since you all filmed the West Wing together, you have remained a family. You have been there to support one another. And what a beautiful, extraordinary example of the strength and the power and the resources that we need right now in our life, which is connection and community. Melissa, I want to ask you about this, because as you reflect on the last couple of years of the pandemic, what was it like for you emotionally, and how did it push you to reflect more deeply on the connections in your own life?
Well, it was certainly challenging. I am somebody who likes to be out in the world and be with people, and I get a lot of energy from that. And I have parents who are older, so I really wanted to make sure that I isolated a lot. And I have wonderful housemates who I live with, and that was a real blessing during that time, and our dogs. But so many of us were struggling during that time, and I was definitely sustained by the love and support of my friends and my family. Including, the people on this Zoom today, the West Wing family. And I think what it reminded me of is something that I think we all know, but but it was profound during COVID, is what you talk about in your book, together, about the importance of staying connected, and that human connection is truly therapeutic. And I know that, I've said it before, but this West Wing family has been such an important part of my support system for many years in many ways. And I'm incredibly grateful for them being there for me during all the times, and particularly being willing to talk today and show up, and to once again support everybody out there who's struggling and who's in need of hope.
You know what?
Go ahead,
What I
Brian.
was just going to throw in, this community that we are so lucky to have, it just made me think about something that I think young people, I've noticed, anybody who's raising a kid is terrified about the effect of this little evil device, this brain snatcher. And I was on a set the other day, and I was thinking back to before the cell phone, when we were getting to know each other, when they would say cut, there was this explosion of connection and laughter and everything. And I was on a set where they said cut, and everybody just looked down at their phones. And the science, I'm not, I don't want to be grandpa on the porch here, because I think it's all relative. My grandmother cried because telephones made it so nobody wrote letters anymore, and cars destroyed communities. And I guarantee you, when they invented the printing press, a bunch of monks came over and were like, I just memorized this whole book. What are you doing? And like, it's all relative. and we have to deal with it. But I think it's a significant accelerator, I know, specifically in girls, but it's an accelerator of isolation and anxiety in the world, especially for young people, I think.
We were lucky.
Brett,
We're pretty
Go ahead,
lucky, though,
Melissa.
our West Wing family, because service has been something, at least, I mean, we sort of, one of us will sound the alarm about a cause or a race or a march or something, and we all show up. And it's been such a gift in my life to have that family. We go to each other's, funerals and weddings, but really during COVID, Melissa and I decided, and it was a tricky decision. We were like, oh, we'll write a book. That seems easy. And so we wrote a book about the West Wing. Turns out it's not easy at all. Hats off to everyone who's written a book. I'm like,
That's your mental health tip.
yeah, don't write a book.
Or do write a book.
But the nice part is it's called What's Next? A Citizen's Guide to the West Wing. It's all about our relationship to service and how we all support each other in our different service causes, and shining a light on the different organizations that we love. But the nice thing about it during COVID for me and Melissa was that we did like 100 interviews or over 100 interviews. And we once a week or twice a week, we would be catching up with an old West Wing cast member or crew member, or and just we just had a ball with that. That was really a little bit of a lifesaver for you, right? And
Absolutely. And to work with you has been a lifesaver.
Yeah, that was nice.
Really great.
Zoom helps.
I'd love to bring Martin in here with a particular question. Martin, we had the chance, you and I, to speak of recently, and it was such a lovely conversation for me just to hear some of your reflections on mental health. We were talking a bit about some of the drivers of mental health, and I think you raised some interesting and important questions about why are we seeing, for example, this worsening mental health crisis at a time where more people are, for example, taking antidepressant medication, where we're talking about this more, and there seems to be more awareness around mental health. And I think it was such an important point to raise, because it also helps, I think, us understand that addressing mental illness means that we've got to understand what's driving it and recognize that the solution has to be holistic. That it's, while there is a place, for medication in some cases, there's also important for many people to have access to counseling services. It's important for people to have access to community and to connection. And when they don't, when they're isolated and alone, that can make mental health struggles so much more challenging to deal with. Brad had also mentioned the point around technology. I think the current generation of young people who are growing up today are experiencing an environment, especially a tech and an information environment, that's unlike anything prior generations have experienced. And some of it is helpful and beneficial in creating efficiencies and finding community, but some of it's also been potentially harmful in making people feel worse about themselves and about their connections with other people. So I was curious, Martin, as you think about the impact in particular of community, which you spoke so beautifully of, as you think about how we need to talk about mental health differently, what reflections would you share with us?
Well, thank you, Doctor. Community is the key to all of this, I believe, and it's borne out. It's been said that we serve ourselves best when we serve our neediest first. And so that is a reflection of community. But I think that what we talked about is become so critical with the I think over prescription for drugs that are for the most part just a kind of a simple and direct solution, so-called, and it never really addresses the problems. And I think that because there's so many more of us and the need is so greater, prescriptions are the easiest and the fastest method, and it overlooks the community and the importance of community. And I just want to share a brief story that I was involved in some years ago. I was invited to go to Auschwitz. I'd always been curious about how people survived Auschwitz, despite the horrors and the innumerable atrocities and numbers of death in that specific camp, not to mention all the others. But I read a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. He was a therapist practicing in Vienna. And this very morning, when he was on his way with the manuscript for his next book on mental health, he was arrested on the streets of Vienna and sent immediately to Auschwitz. He was there for nearly 4 years. He never saw his wife or family ever again. He lost all his friends. When he arrived at Auschwitz, they took away his manuscript and his clothes, and he was given a prisoner's garment that had the smell of gas in it. And he reached in the pocket and he found a piece of paper and he brought it out, and it was the Hebrew prayer for the dying, the Kaddish. He kept that the rest of his life, and it's what helped him focus on the suffering that was going on around him. And Viktor Frankl came to the most powerful meaning of suffering, and that is that if it has meaning, it has purpose. If it has no meaning, it leads to despair. And so he began with his colleagues and those prisoners that were able to join him in this effort to give suffering meaning. And hence the title of his book, Man's Search for Meaning. But he gave so many examples of when they saw despair. An inmate, for example, he talks about would get into a corner or in the shadows and go into a fetal position, and that meant that they were giving up and they were intent on dying. And the community would get together and they would very lovingly sing to him and pray with him and pull his limbs or her limbs aside and pull him up and out and take him into the community and make sure that he knew he was loved. When we know that we are loved, we have a chance to give suffering great meaning. And it's not just for ourselves. We heal through and with each other. And if we are able just to surrender our egos and our horrible pain, sometimes being human, just waking up from day to day is an ordeal. It's painful to just face the everyday. And we live in a pretty free and well-staffed society, and yet we're suffering. So because we suffer alone, and our suffering doesn't have any meaning. And so with community, we can take this brokenness that is natural for every human being. We can bless it with each other, for each other, and we can make progress together for a common purpose. That suffering does have meaning, and when we suffer with meaning, it has purpose and it can heal. And that's community. And there is not a single hero in the history of the human race that has ever achieved anything worthwhile that has not suffered to get there. If what we believe is not costly, then we're left to question its value. And so I think community is the most valuable asset we have. And we just have to lay those cell phones aside and come together and see each other face to face or on Zoom to Zoom and communicate our brokenness, our pain, and make it meaningful.
And it's so
Just wanna,
beautifully said. So beautifully said, Martin. And
just
one
wanna
of the things that you're, I think, underscoring here also is that anybody can do this, right? You don't need to be a mental health provider, a nurse, a doctor in order to be able to provide community, in order to help other people feel like they're not alone. Simply by checking on a friend, by sharing our own struggles with them, we can help them feel that they're not alone. Dule, you were going to say?
Yeah, I'm actually going to have to jump off, so I just wanted to jump in real quick. You know, piggybacking off of what I heard Martin saying about love and what Brad was saying about the, you know, these devices that are making us feel isolated. You saying, so in general, that you don't have to be a doctor to be able to have an effect or be an expert. It's important that we all just continue to engage each other, to see each other in our humanity, all the good things about us and all of the challenging things about us. You know, I find great inspiration really to be involved, one from the West Wing cast, but also from my wife, Jasmine Simon. You know, it's very, for her and even for myself, it's very important to sow seeds of goodness from young. You know, as we get older, we're dealing with all these issues because the root was tainted a lot of times. That we're not shown as we were young that we are perfect in every way that we are, that we are good in every way that we are. No matter how we're formed, no matter what our desires are, we are actually perfect. And I think it's important to keep having these conversations to be able to share that dynamic that much more. You know, Mary, I know you were saying it was hard to write a book. Well, you know, it's very easy. All you have to do is be married to a book author. It makes it very easy to write a book. At that point, you know, I mean, Jasmine's book, Most Perfect You, I think it inspires me so much because it really is about teaching kids that they are perfect in every way. And we actually have a second book coming out now that we are releasing together. And it was very easy for me to write it. You know what I mean? All I had to do was like say, yes, put that period right there, baby. Oh yeah, we did a great job. But it's called repeat after me. Big things to say every day. And I think it's important that we are able to just tell ourselves and tell each other how good we are. And I want everyone to know that you are perfect exactly the way that you are. You are loved exactly the way that you are. You are here for a reason. You have value, no matter who you are on this planet, and every step that you take matters. To be able to make it to the next day, to be able to make it to the next moment shows the strength that is inside of you. And that strength that is inside of you can allow you to conquer anything that comes your way. And you are not alone. There are times that even though I'm very blessed, I'm getting ready to go to set right now, but I wake up some mornings extremely fatigued in my mind, looking at the world, trying to search for hope, trying to be connected to people. And I can still feel isolated and alone. But I want you to know that you are not alone. I'm not alone. And together we will make our way to our brighter tomorrow. Much love to you all. Thank you so much for having me. I miss all of you so much, and keep up the good fight. We'll catch on up. I always like to say, stay encouraged, because later is most definitely going to be greater.
Beautiful.
Right.
Love you, Dule.
Love you all too. See you later. All right.
Thank you, Dule.
You know what? One thing I was thinking about what Martin was saying, that absolutely community and connection, especially when people are suffering. And one thing I think I've learned as I've gotten older, when someone is suffering, it can be threatening to us because it reminds us of our own capacity for suffering. And it can intimidate us because we think, especially if it's someone we love, that we should be able to fix it. And I've learned, certainly in marriage and with my children, that you don't have to fix it. You just have to be there with them in whatever they're going through. We don't have to be a trained professional to help the people we love go through the suffering. And we don't have to be threatened by our inability to fix those. We have to just sort of constantly, I think, go towards connection, as Martin was saying.
Beautiful. Thank you, Brad. Ambassador Rice, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Murthy. And I just want to say, Martin, Brad, what Dule said, it's all incredibly powerful and important. So thank you for being so generous in sharing. Dr. Murthy, I actually want to turn it over and ask you a question. Thinking back to May, when we hosted at the White House a mental health youth action forum, and we highlighted the urgency and the importance of addressing mental health issues for young people. And you moderated a really powerful conversation with Dr. Biden, our First Lady, with a bunch of really impressive young leaders. And I know you continue to speak with young people all the time about mental health in your work to try to remove the stigma for those who are seeking help for mental health challenges. So I just wanted you to share a bit about why this, from your perspective, is such a vital conversation to have with young people in particular. And what are you hearing from young people? What do they need from us most?
Well, thanks, Ambassador Rice. Part of the reason I feel so passionate about having these conversations with young people and why I'm so grateful that all of us together are working on youth mental health is because I think that the single greatest barrier to whether a young person growing up in America today is able to achieve their full potential and lead a life where they're healthy and happy actually has to do with their mental health. And the fact that so many young people are struggling now with their mental health means that it's harder for them to stay healthy physically as well. It's harder for them to engage in school. It's harder for them to engage in work. And it's harder for them to engage in their community. These are all aspects of our life that we need to shore up in order to be fulfilled and happy. And so again, that concept of mental health as the fuel that allows us to show up in life and be our full selves is more true now than ever. And that's why I think we have such an obligation to invest in helping young people who are struggling. But here's why I actually feel encouraged about that. When I do talk to young people around the country, they are remarkably open about their mental health in ways that prior generations were not. That doesn't mean that the stigma is gone entirely. It's not. There's still many young people I talk to who are scared to say that they are lonely, who are worried about saying that they're being bullied online because they worry it makes them look weak. But so we still have work to do there. But there is a growing openness and I think a deeper level of insight into what's driving their mental health struggles than we often, I think, give young people credit for. Like when I do talk to young people about what's driving the crisis, here's what they say. They say, well, it's a fact that many of us are being bullied, not just in person, but online. Many of us are struggling with loneliness. Many of us use technology because we feel like we have to. Everyone else is using it. But sometimes social media makes us feel worse about ourselves and more disconnected from other people. But they also look at the future. And they say that, the threat of climate change, of racism, of other fundamental challenges that we're seeing in society, like violence in communities, this all makes them wonder if the future really is brighter than the past. Right. And you put all of those struggles on top of the fact that there's just an incredible pace of change that young people are experiencing right now. And that can combine to create an incredibly stressful environment. We can address this, though. The good news is we know how to make help more available. We have to change the reality that it takes young people on average 11 years from when they have symptoms to when they get help. That is just unacceptable. And that's why I'm so proud of the work our administration is doing to expand access to help, to train more people to be mental health providers. But we've also got to address some of these other drivers as well, understand better how technology is impacting the mental health of young people, make sure that there's accountability there, when it comes to developing technology that may in fact hurt or harm young people. And we've got to make sure finally that we are doing our part, not just as policymakers, not just as cultural leaders, but all of us as family members, as friends, to eradicate that stigma. And we do that by sharing, by talking about mental health more openly, and by checking on one another so that people know that they're not alone. Last I want to underscore what Brad said at the end there, that it's not about fixing everyone's problems, right? When we show up for someone else in their life, what we are saying to them is, you matter, I see you, and you're not alone. And we can do that simply with our presence, with the power of our listening, with our willingness to give someone else our full attention. And so in that manner, I believe we can all be healers, and we're all called to do so in this moment.
Thank you, Dr. Murthy. Thinking back to earlier in the year, I understand you had a conversation with Dule, a really powerful conversation about how youth mental health issues have affected his family. And so I think we all understand that a great deal of what we experience as children and adolescents obviously impacts us as adults. And Brad, I know you have a perspective on this, and I wonder if you'd be willing to share your experience.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm as close to these people in the cast, and this, and here we are talking about this, and this is something that was so frightening for me to talk about. I don't know that I've talked about it with them. I've only talked about it recently because some people who I love, I found out I'd gone through a similar experience, and I knew that the inability to talk about it was not helping them. So, long story short, there was when I was very young, a teacher, a woman, was physically extensively inappropriate with me. And I was, as a child, struck dumb by it. I didn't know how to speak about it, and it's part of the horror that young people who deal with that have to deal with. Any sort of inappropriate thing like that not only traumatizes the child who does not have the tools to sort it out, it forces the child to then clean up the mess. And this happens, it happens with any sort of inappropriate sexual event, even later in life, is then talking about it puts kind of defines your life in a way that sort of continues it. Anyway, it is something that it's not. I'm 63. This happened when I was in 6th grade. I still remember very specific things about this. I didn't even realize it was an issue until it poured out of me in my 20s. I knew it had happened, but I didn't know how to talk about it. And I have been very lucky because I've had access to the to resources that everybody should have in terms of talk therapy. But I was able to find a very safe place where I could talk about it. And I'll never get rid of the fact that this thing happened to me. And but giving it a name, giving it perspective, has allowed me to not still be captive to it. But it was a very, very, very long process. And it's one thing that I have tell my children is, and often I understand it's not a parent you can talk to about these things. You want to make sure that your kids not only know that they can talk to you about absolutely anything, but to understand that children will have access with other responsible adults and other supportive people, because as we all know, there's a lot of stuff you don't want to talk to mom and dad about. But it's been it's striking to me how this thing that I never, again, I think I've told Mary McCormick pretty much everything about what I have ever done. But it was something that, really only, 50 years later, just because I want to normalize these things that happen that ding us up, that we become paralyzed with shame.
Yeah.
And we don't have to, because everybody's getting dinged up.
Yeah, those wounds can be battle scars, right? We can make them scars with the appropriate help. And that's what's so encouraging about what the Biden-Harris administration is doing. I mean, I'm so encouraged to hear that you guys are investing in these early, I mean, for kids to be able to get help at school, for kids to understand what their phones are doing to them. I have 3 daughters who, one of my eldest daughter's 18 and she has deleted all social media because she felt what it was doing to her. But I wish she had someone to talk to about that. I wish she had some leadership on that, and she stumbled on that just in self-preservation. But all kids need that kind of information, and fast.
I think kids, it's encouraging to me because I sense kids, by the way, we joyously handed these kids these crack pipes, which just sort of breaks my heart.
Yeah, but it's isolating in another way if they don't have it, because that's how kids connect. So it's
a very tricky thing for them to navigate, but I do think I sense in my kids the acknowledgement that it is something to navigate.
They know.
And
especially girls. I have 3 daughters, and they are, not only they know if they're not invited to the party because they're watching it in real time. They know their thighs don't look like that girl's thighs who are photoshopped anyway. I mean, it's a minefield for girls, and I'm watching it with a front row seat.
Well, I know, I'm not sure what while the statistics of anxiety and suicide are up for all young people, it is especially I think the suicide rate is like 50% more or something, with girls who are, for many reasons, under a lot more pressure in this digital age.
Brad, first of all, thank you so much for sharing so powerfully your experience and opening that to all of us. I think, it's so fortunate, as you said, that you, in your experience, later in life had the capacity and the resources to get the help that you needed to have the kind of support and therapy that everybody deserves when they are struggling, and too few people have. And Mary, thanks for sharing about your daughters. I too, I'm a mother of a daughter and a son who are now young adults, and through their experiences too. I mean, I see how challenging this all is, and how unfair it really is that, for those who have resources, there's one set of experiences, and for those that don't, there's quite a different set. And that's why, we have really tried in the course of this administration to begin to put more adequate resources to this challenge. And when the president received, after pushing through the American Rescue Plan, $122 billion for our schools, an important part of that money we have sought to direct to youth mental health and helping to increase access to mental health services in our schools. And when it comes to social media, we're very concerned, as we've been discussing, about how corrosive technology and social media apps are to our kids and their self-image, their sense of belonging. And I do think, Brad, as you said, it's particularly challenging for girls. And that's part of the reason why the president has called on Congress and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who share, in many instances, these concerns about how social media giants operate and the power that they've amassed. President Biden has made it clear that we have to hold social media platforms accountable. And he called it, for the national experiment they're conducting on our children for profit, as he said in his State of the Union. And that means we need in legislation things like strengthening children's privacy online and banning the kind of advertising that targets them. We also need legislation that'll institute stronger online protections for young people and stop these addictive design features that make it the crack pipe, as you say, Brad. And then we also need to invest in research and best practices so we can figure out how we understand and then address much more effectively the impact of social media on youth mental health. And President's budget requests ask for money for that. And the Department of Health and Human Services just awarded funding to the American Academy of Pediatrics to launch a National Center of Excellence on social media and mental wellness to really delve into this issue. And many of you will recall that over the summer, Congress passed and the President signed something called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That's the legislation that's known as really the first significant gun safety legislation in over 30 years. But that act of Congress also had significant resources for youth mental health, including 1.7 billion that have already been started going out to schools and communities across the country. Obviously, there's a lot more we have to do. The President's budget request for this fiscal year proposed, a combined $100 billion in mandatory funding over 10 years to implement his national mental health strategy. We need Congress and everybody to step up so that we can build the workforce, we can train and hire more mental health professionals, particularly those that are in school and those and for those people who, as we said, just don't have the resources that they need to access the mental health support and services that are so critical. So there's a lot there that we're doing and a lot more that needs to be done. And that's why the kind of honest, open sharing and advocacy that you all are doing as members of the West Wing cast is so vitally important. So I just want to thank you again. And so as I do that, I want to turn it back to ask you all and Secretary Becerra a question here. And that is this: in addition to the mental health crisis, the President has also identified beating the opioid epidemic as an urgent bipartisan priority. And he said that too in his State of the Union address and made it part of his unity agenda. And we know that there's often some significant overlap between people who are struggling with substance use disorders and people who have mental health conditions, and that when these conditions co-occur, they can go undiagnosed and undertreated. But when you, without the proper treatment, people who have these co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders really have even poorer outcomes. And that's why we've tried to invest billions in strengthening prevention and harm reduction and treatment and recovery supports. But again, here too, there's a lot more we need to do. Melissa, you have been such a powerful advocate for substance use disorder treatment and recovery support. And we'd love to hear your perspective. Where have we made progress, and what more in your judgment needs to be done, and what do we prioritize going forward?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I think there's a lot of good news here. And some of the good news is that treatment works and that millions and millions of people are living proof of this. And I see it in my work with treatment courts. As I said, I see it every single day. And treatment courts prove that with the right combination of treatment and services, people can and do get better every single day, millions of them. And treatment courts are just one of many, many examples of the progress we're making in ensuring the justice system adopts a public health response to these issues. So I'm really heartened by the movement that's been happening there. And I'm also heartened that this administration is doing what needs to be done, particularly when it comes to investments in treatment. Quality, affordable, evidence-based treatment must be available for every single person who needs it. I believe we are making great strides to get there. And I believe that to get there, we all need to work together to make it happen. And I think conversations, open, honest ones, and really dedication will make that happen. Because this is an issue that touches all of us. I mean, all of our families, as is evident here by this conversation today. My dad was a judge in Philadelphia who saw firsthand the devastation that substance use and mental health disorders had on individuals who were caught up in the justice system. And he knew there had to be a better way. So he established with other people the first mental health court in Philadelphia. And, I came to this work in part because of my dad, but not only because of my dad, also because of Martin Sheen. I had lost a dear friend to addiction and suicide. And Martin knew, and he invited me to join him at the National Association of Drug Court Professionals National Conference. And I was truly inspired by the work and by Martin's dedication to it. I just wanted to throw this to Martin for a second. Martin, you have been a treatment court champion for close to 30 years now, and you have spoken out on behalf of people with substance use and mental health disorders at times when no one else would. Why has it been so important for you to talk openly about these issues and stand as such a powerful ally for those who often don't have anyone in their corner?
Well, as is so often the case, if something is not personal, it's impersonal, and if it's impersonal, it's hard to care. So all of these issues were personal for me, not just in my own life, but in family and friends, extended family, and coworkers. One thing I wanted to mention, Melissa, regarding drug court, is the very heroic effort, not only of your father, but there was a judge in I believe it is Boston, that expanded drug court for veterans. There were so many people coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq with horrible PTSD after multiple tours, and they were involved in basically suicidal behavior. And this man, and if you would please remember his name, which
Dr.
is
Robert Russell from Buffalo, New York.
Yes, Judge Russell founded drug court for veterans, and it has made a profound difference because we kind of know each other in the communities, and so when they struck the chord of combat experiences that were causing these horrible problems of mental health and addiction, they had friends and again a community, and it was called Veterans Drug Court. And so, Melissa, you have been such an advocate and have given so much of your life to this issue, and we're eternally grateful. So as I say, if it's personal, it has meaning. If it's impersonal, it's hard to make contact with anyone. I also wanted to make just a very brief statement about Ms. Rice about the gun control. I want to mention that gun safety laws are not trying to take away the guns. They are trying to stop the guns from taking away our children. That's the bottom line. And I think that, so many gun proponents, advocates of owning firearms are less inclined to see that is a responsibility that we have to face. And so, again, thank you so much. I appreciate those good comments.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Melissa, also for being such important champions of treatment courts. I mean, these are, I'm not sure everybody necessarily who's listening knows exactly what they are, but these are important alternatives to incarceration. And, they provide treatment and recovery services to nonviolent criminal offenders who have substance use challenges. And we see the value of this approach in the administration, and that's why we've proposed over $100 million for the treatment court program that Department of Health and Human Services runs. And we've also given states through this legislation we were just discussing, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the gun safety legislation, over 5 years, some $750 million to support these kinds of crisis intervention services, including treatment courts. So thank you for lifting those up and their importance. Secretary Becerra, my friend and partner, your department, the Department of Health and Human Services, recently released a comprehensive overdose prevention strategy. And we'd love you to share how the department is working to address this crisis and make the progress that we all know is so badly needed.
Sure, Ambassador, thank you very much. And what we decided to do is we didn't want to work with what we had, because what we had when it came to our overdose strategy oftentimes relied on stigma to shame people and blame people. It relied on anecdotes versus evidence. And so we came up with a strategy that was evidence-based, that shed that stigma and that blame, that became inclusive. So it's not just for those who can afford it or who can find the help. It's not just a prevention strategy or a treatment strategy, but now we incorporate, along with prevention and treatment, harm reduction, because in between trying to prevent it, if you don't succeed and before that person gets treatment, they do a lot of harm to themselves. And we're now in the business of trying to help reduce harm as we get them to treatment. And then finally, we made sure we lifted up as a fourth pillar, recovery support, because you may make it through the treatment, but you now have the long haul of staying clean and moving forward. And we want to be there shoulder to shoulder with you. So our strategy is one that incorporates what people need and continues to be there while they need it. That's why, for example, we mentioned 988, that 3-digit call line. It used to be before mid-year of 2022 this year, that if you needed help, there was a lifeline you could call. It was a 10-digit number. Depending on what state you were in, it could be a different number. People were confused. Today, we're trying to make 988 the way we all recognize 911. So if you are suffering from a mental health crisis, if you're thinking about suicide, no longer do you have to try to find that 10-digit number. If you're willing, right before you go the wrong way, to reach out for some help, 988. And we stitched together a nationwide network, because it is not a national network. We don't operate it at the federal level. We help bring the states together to make it run well. And thanks to an investment by President Biden, which was more than 20 times what had been invested before him, we were able to make it into a nationwide system. So today, if you call, you're going to get an answer. You won't be put on hold. And then we also added text and chat, because as we've been saying, so many of our sons and daughters today don't like to necessarily make the phone call. They'd rather text or chat. And all of a sudden, we saw an increase of 50% in the number of people who were calling into the lifeline from August of last year to August of this year. And so we know we're making a difference there. We're going to continue to do it. Just as we stood up the 24/7 crisis hotlines, crisis care clinics that are there to provide services to those who need it, not just in the 9 to 5 hour, but at any point during the day. Today, we have put out $300 million to help states stand up those crisis care centers that are 24/7. And today, through the president's guidance, we are standing up. The Department of Education, Secretary Cardona and I are working together to help schools that want to restore healthcare services within the K through 12 school system. We're trying to help them make sure that there's someone there that can offer kids healthcare services right there where they need them, and including behavioral health, mental health services. So we're going the full gamut here, trying to make sure that we do what we must, because we know folks are crying out for help.
Secretary Becerra, thank you for talking about 988 in particular. I think that is such a vital service. And you have, by the way, been tireless in traveling around the country, talking about 988, talking about mental health, making sure that people know that help is available. So just incredibly grateful to you for doing that. And I also just want to ask Mary and Melissa, these efforts that Secretary Becerra is talking about to get help immediately to people, the policy investments that Ambassador Rice has talked about, like the funding that we're now providing to train people to ensure that certified behavioral health centers are now available in more communities across America. I'm just curious, from your own lived experience, like, why is it so important that we provide such support for people who are in the midst of crisis?
Melissa, you want to do it? You're muted, honey.
Sorry. Thank you. That'll be the theme of this year. You're muted. I think it is. Well, it's critical that people can reach out for help when they need it. And I had an experience relatively recent, well, really just a few weeks ago, where someone was in trouble. She was not near me. I couldn't get to her. She was in another state. And I was able to reach out to some of her friends and suggested they use the 988 number. And she is now safe and she is okay. And she is getting some help. So I think that this is critical. And I'm grateful, so grateful that 988 exists. I hope that we can spread the word. I mean, if that's one thing that we do today is spread the word about 988.
Yeah, amazing that it's 24/7. And also that I think you said, Melissa, that it's like 250 languages you guys offer. That's incredible. I mean, that's just wonderful. And that there's special
trained counselors.
Yeah, but for different issues, like for LGBTQ plus and for military folks. And I mean, that once they call, then there's actually, specific help available, I think is incredible. The 988 thing is really incredible. Yeah, that's a real lifeline. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Well, I'm getting the word. And thank you for sharing. And Mary, I just want to make sure that we hear from you any additional thoughts you have just on the importance
No,
of
I mean,
having
I'm
these
also
services
encouraged
available.
just to hear what Secretary Becerra was saying about the help in schools, because I mean, just with 3 daughters, I am, we are pretty concerned. I mean, and my kids, we do talk about mental health in my house. They didn't get a phone without a therapist in our house. They didn't get it till they were 14, but these are, they're still struggling. They're still struggling. And the option to not give them one at 14 is also tricky, because then they're isolated in a different way. So I'm thrilled to hear that you guys are doing all that research on what the ramifications of that are, going to hold these companies accountable, and that there'll be help in schools where they need it. I mean, even the lockdown drills, what that's done to my kids' mental health. I mean, and what's the option? No lockdown drill? There's so many things that they're facing. Never mind the climate. They lose sleep over the climate, and they're kids. So I'm grateful for everything you're doing. It's in the nick of time.
Just to add on to what Mary was saying, I think about a lot. I grew up in a progressive Quaker family, became I was born in 1959. I was very aware of the horrors that were happening on television. It was a time where there was great division in the country and violence, horrible violence. But I was raised by parents who had been through the Depression, been through World War II, and I internalized an optimism, even though my parents were critical about what was going on politically, that the world was going to get better. There was this fundamental optimism about whatever the flaws, whatever the country was doing wrong, that we were going to ultimately move in a healthier direction. I think we have to acknowledge the fact that our kids today have gotten a different story, and a different, it can get a different sense that the planet is on fire, that there is an irrational political conversation going on that can be, really tough. And I think we have to really acknowledge what our kids are facing in that, combined with a world. I have people in my life who I love, who are in recovery. And when you see the world through people who are in recovery through their eyes, it's probably a capitalist impulse, but what people in recovery are dealing with constantly is a message of, are you sad? Drink. Are you happy? Drink. Did your team win? Drink. Did they lose? Drink. You walk into a hotel and the bar's lit up like an altar. I mean, it's tough. It's tough for these people, who are struggling with that specific thing. And we have to be conscious about this dangerous mix of anxiety, and potentially dangerous short-sighted solutions to that anxiety. So I'm glad that there is a place, 988, that people can call, and that we can get in our heads with the same urgency that in need that we have 911. That when we're in trouble, we have a place to go and begin the discussion.
Well, this is so rich just to hear all of this from all of you. And I think what this conversation really highlights is that these are real struggles that people all across America are facing. Just like Mary's thinking about her daughters and how to raise them with technologies? That is the most common question I get from parents around the country. How do I manage technology and social media in my children? Many of you talked about your own experiences with trauma, having friends who are considering taking their lives or going through crisis. This is what people all across America are dealing with. And so I'm so grateful we're talking about that today. And as we bring this conversation to a close, and I'm getting the word that unfortunately we do have to do that, I want to end by asking each of you just for a quick reflection on what brings you hope as you look to the future. Ambassador Rice, could we start with you?
Thank you, Dr. Murthy. I think this is a great way to end. I guess for me, I've been doing this long enough that is the work of policy making and the sausage making of Washington, that I've kind of learned never to get too high or too low. But I actually believe there is a lot of reason for optimism when it comes to dealing with mental health. And I think there are two main reasons I feel optimistic. One is, we have seen very encouraging bipartisan support on Capitol Hill for supporting the challenges of mental health, whether for youth or the communities more broadly. And we don't see that on every issue. And the other reason, I think, is because we're really beginning to see a groundswell of energy and activism and attention to these issues in recent years. Some of that obviously spurred by what we experienced during COVID. But when we have leaders like those who we're blessed to have with us today from the West Wing, prominent celebrities, athletes, other leaders speaking out. And we've had roundtables at the White House in recent months with Black women leaders, with young advocates, with Native youth. And all of this is, really indicative of a significant increase in awareness and a decrease in stigma. So those are two real reasons why I remain quite hopeful.
That's beautiful. Secretary Becerra, how about you? What gives you hope?
So I mentioned the word resilience when I started. And when you think of those who are hurting, those who are helping, the professionals who've gone through thick and thin, even during COVID, to be there, resilience has really stood out. I would add one more word, and perhaps Martin Sheen would recognize it. The word is ganas, G-A-N-A-S. I would urge you not to look it up in the dictionary. I'm going to give you the best definition of the word ganas in Spanish. It's guts, grit, and game all packed in one. Whenever my parents would tell me if there was some challenge I had before me, they would always say, tienes que tener ganas. You just have to have ganas. You have to have the desire to get to the finish line. And I believe that that's what people have in this case when we talk about mental health, substance use services. We want to get to the finish line because we know at the end of the day, it's about our loved one. We're saving a life and making it better. And so at the end of the day, we've seen the resilience from so many people. And I guarantee you, we're going to see a lot of ganas as we get past this. So I'm just thrilled to join, as I said, the Bartlett administration with the Biden administration so we can get some real stuff done with ganas.
Beautiful. I love that. And speaking of the Bartlett administration, President Bartlett, Martin, how about you? What gives you hope?
Well, a straight line to that guy named Joe, who was courageous enough to admit his shortcomings and to express himself with all the imperfections and brokenness of his powerful humanity. And he reflects the adage that one heart with courage is a majority. So we're grateful to your boss and your administration that's brought us all together and renewed a very powerful sense of hope.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you, Martin. Mary, how about you?
I think, just this today is pretty encouraging, hearing everything that the Biden and Harris administration is up to. Conversations like this, because I think, you could just, with any problem, with addiction, with any problem, you can't treat it until you name it, right? And so I think this is a great first step, talking about it and naming it and taking the stigma, like Ambassador Rice was talking about, taking the stigma off of it so we can all find community in the fact that we were all struggling, and so I'm grateful for this conversation today. It's been really great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And Brad, how about you? What gives you hope?
What gives me a lot of hope is the way young people showed up for a midterm election. That really gives me a lot of hope, and not just for the corny guy who was on a political show, political advocate. I actually think it's a fundamental part of our American mental health is that the spectacular, unfulfilled, fundamental promise of this country is the idea that you have some agency over your future, that you're not at the mercy of it, but that it's an act of your own imagination. And that act is embodied in political participation, in the fundamental act of voting. I think it's a testament to the resilience of this young generation, that they have every reason to be cynical, and they refuse to be cynical because, despair is a luxury that their future cannot afford. And I'm just thrilled that they showed up. It gives me a lot of hope, and they had something to vote for, which I am extremely grateful to your boss for.
Oh, I appreciate that, Brad.
Well,
And
I just wanted to
Melissa?
say one of the
Okay.
things that gives me the most hope is these conversations, and that people as dedicated and brilliant as you, Dr. Morthy, and Ambassador Rice and Secretary Becerra are directing your attention to this critical issue, and that you are that this administration is investing, and that more and more resources are available. And I want to give some out because that's critical to me, that people watching know that if they're struggling with a substance use disorder, you can go to findtreatment.gov, or you can call 1-800-662-HELP. And you can find treatment resources. You can call the 988 if you are if you are in crisis, mental health, addiction crisis. And I also am just very grateful to my friends who are here today, who very openly shared their own experiences. I find it moving, touching, and I think it's, especially you, Brad, today, like what a gift you gave to so many people who are struggling. I am just incredibly moved by that. And I think that the only way we are going to fully address issues around addiction and mental health is to lead with understanding, with empathy, and with love.
Gosh, so moving and so beautifully said, Melissa. Thank you. As we close today, I just want to share one reflection, and then I'm going to turn it to Secretary Becerra to close us out. But as we were talking about this, I was just thinking about growing up as a child who was struggling with loneliness and anxiety and depression myself, and getting a call. I remember when I was in grade school that my uncle had taken his own life, and not knowing what to do about it, and just feeling this profound sense of isolation and shame and helplessness in those moments. And I wish I had what so many of you have so beautifully shared today, which are people who helped me feel like it was okay to talk about these things, who helped me realize that it wasn't necessarily that I was broken, that was the reason for my struggling, and to let me know that there was help available. My hope is that today, that through this conversation, that we were able to provide some of that hope for people around the country who may be listening, who might be struggling themselves, who might have children or friends who are struggling, and who might think, is there help available? Is anybody working on this? Am I the only one who's feeling this way? And we want you to know that hope is, there, and help is available. And I'll just tell you, I feel more hopeful now than I've ever felt in my career in public health, that we can take on the challenges with mental health that stand before us. We have a president who cares deeply about this and who has put so much of his own effort behind it. We have members of his administration who are here today. We have bipartisan interests in Congress. We have organizations, workplaces in particular, and schools that are stepping up to ask every day, what can we do to be helpful, and are building programs to do that. And most importantly, we have young people across America who are not waiting to see what help comes, but who are starting to take matters into their own hands, who are creating and running programs in their schools and communities to help one another. All of that gives me hope. And fundamentally, I just think we all have three basic needs as human beings. We all want to know that we matter. We all want to feel seen and understood, and we all want to be loved. And the beautiful thing is that we can provide that for each other. And I think for anyone who's listening here today, if you're struggling, know that you're not alone, know that there's help available, but also know that you can be part of the solution for people in your life who are struggling, because you can't always tell from the outside who is struggling. We are become all masters in making it seem like everything is perfectly fine, even though there's a hurricane inside us, that's churning and that's whipping us up. And so reaching out to others to ask how they're doing, to make sure they know that you are available as a friend, to simply listen and be with them, that is one of the most powerful sources of healing that you can provide. So I'm so grateful to all of you from the West Wing cast who have joined today, not just for today, but for your leadership, for the example that you've set over the last many years, and for giving me hope. And I know many others hope through this conversation. Grateful for you. Secretary Becerra, let me turn it to you to close this out.
Well, this has been a great session by some great leaders and people who have the ability to speak from personal experience. We hope that everyone in America recognizes that they're not alone, that what they suffer from, we all have at some point suffered from or know someone who has. It is interesting, 90% of Americans are telling us that America is suffering from a mental health crisis, that we have not done enough. And when you think about it, if our child breaks an arm, we know we can go to the doctor and get that arm mended. When it's time to go for that checkup, we know we're gonna hear from our doctor about our blood pressure, our weight, and what we have to do. What we have to do is also make it so that anytime we're going to go and get checked up, we also include our mental health. So it's not just repairing the broken arm, but it's talking about the broken heart and the mind that's really suffering from crisis. And that healthcare means not just the physical health, it also means the mental health. And that's what President Biden is striving to do, is to get America to the point where when we speak about health, it means the checkup that includes your mental health, not just your physical health. It means recognizing that we can talk about our broken arm just as we could talk about our broken mind or broken heart. And that's where we will go if all of us continue to work together. As we've seen today, we all have a story. We have to share that because we know America's hurting, and we want them to know that if they want help, we'll be there together as a family, as Martin said, as a community. It's time we do it. And we're thrilled that the team from West Wing was willing to join us today in this continued effort to reach out to America to make us all stronger with ganas. Thanks all very much.